Henri Paul Bergeron, GSC Brother André, CSC The Wonder Man of Mount Royal, Revised Edition, translated from the French. Reverend Réal Boudreau, CSC Fides Montreal and Paris. Originally published on April 16, 1958, P.M. Poisson, CSC Censor. Imprimatur, Marianopoli, April 16, 1958, M. Lazens, CSC, Superior Provincial, Imprimatur, Marianopoli, April 16, 1958, MGR, Paul Touches, PAVG. Acknowledgement. The author wishes to acknowledge his indebtedness to those who contributed to the translation of this book, particularly to Reverend Sister Mary of St. Hilda, CSC, of Saint Laurent, Quebec, who revised this translation and greatly assisted in making it more faithful and idiomatic, as far as time and circumstances permitted. And to Reverend Mother Mary of St. Eleanor, CSC, of St. Mary's College, Holy Cross, Indiana, who also revised the translation and the proofs. All rights reserved. Fourth printing, 1969, 120,000 copies. Behold, the Dreamer cometh. Beautiful upon the mountain were your feet, dear Brother André, bringing good tidings, preaching peace and showing forth goodness. Beautiful was your voice, the voice of the watchman, praising the goodness of God, who comforts his people and sends his salvation to the ends of the earth. You, who love to call yourself Saint Joseph's little dog, would likely respond with a characteristic twinkle in your eye. Little dogs have noisy barks. But oh, how beautiful was your voice, when suffering brought its aimless and broken souls and bodies in an unending tide up the slope of the mountain to hear your words of healing, and how beautiful were your hands, lifting up those whom life had hurt so grievously, and making them whole again. In the past, Brother André, your father and mine in God, Basil Moreau, dreamed of a great international shrine to Saint Joseph. He served, as a father will, with good and great children, and bade us to ask Saint Joseph every morning to bless our community and to bring to it subjects who will glorify God. And Saint Joseph brought us you. We could not have dreamed of a more perfect answer to this prayer, said so often sleepily and distractedly. This little note of mine, dear Brother André, is to thank you for allowing me to visit you one time in your small bureau and ask you something which you said Saint Joseph would take care of. It is to thank you for other favors, and especially for letting me edit this book. This book will surely please you, Brother André, because it glorifies God by showing the wonders he worked in your humble self for the honor of his foster father. It is a lovely book, a perfect biography. It even includes a chapter on your imperfections, and will win its way into countless hearts. Though it is comforting for us sinners to know you had some imperfections, we admire you all the more because of your profound humility and contrition. You did not compare your holiness with our lack of it, and thereby make light of your faults. Rather, you compared your faults with God's holiness. This was your dream, to become perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. We who love you believe that your angel of death came only to tell you that your dream came true. The dream Saint Joseph placed in your heart to build him a shrine where he could be a protecting father to the poor suffering ones of Christ also came true. Beautiful was your heart for harboring that dream and working toward it. Here's the corrected text. Ing and suffering for it through all the years. Men laughed at you and scorned you and calumniated you for that dream, but you kept it alive in your heart and toiled on for its fulfillment. The dream could not live on except in your heart, dear little Brother André. And so now your heart remains there in the midst of all the faith and the wonder and the glory, to treasure down the long years its dream come true. Sister Mary Eleanor, CSC. Mother and Child. Vocation. Sowing time. The opening bud. In full bloom. Confidence. Humility. Charity. Imperfections. Devotions. Spiritual life. The personalities of two holy men, last days on earth. Triumph. Introductory note. In conformity with the decrees of the Roman pontiffs, and especially those of Pope Urban VIII, concerning the beatification of the servants of God and the canonization of saints, we declare that the words saint, sanctity, miracle, etc., contained in this biography are designations which stand for our personal impressions as well as those of the immediate witnesses to the story we are relating, and are not meant to anticipate the judgments of the Church, whose most humble and most submissive sons we are. Note of translator. We have throughout translated literally the French word saint, which in that language has a wider connotation than usual in ours, including any holy person, even if not canonized. Mother and child. The humble village of Saint Gregoire d'Iberville, which lies east of Montreal on a plain broken by isolated hills, has the honor of being the birthplace of Brother André. Its residents point with pride to a plot of ground at the crossroads leading to Saint Gregoire and Marieville, saying, "Here stood Brother André's first home." Nothing now remains of this home, and only a broken-down fence and an old stunted elm mark its site. A rugged mountain close by, like a mighty monster, keeps guard above the birthplace of our saint. In the calm peace of a cool October afternoon, within sight of Brother André's one-time home, I sat and mused. Nature was plunged in deep silence. The whole chorus of life that had chirped and sung during the radiant summer was heard no more. Everywhere, the dying autumn splashed against the dark background of the green pines and firs on the hills, the brown and yellow of the beech, the dark purple of the ash tree, the orange of the saffron, and the brilliant scarlet of the maple. While I was dreaming in this scenic beauty, the church bell pealed forth joyously to announce the birth of a Christian, and at the sound, my imagination carried me back to a similar moment long ago. It was August 10, 1845. From the belfry of a small church fashioned from Canadian field stones, a shrill bell announced that a humble procession was approaching the baptismal font. The curious villagers took note that Isaac Bisset was bringing his sixth child to the church for the sacrament. The child had been christened at the moment of his birth for fear that he might not live. On this, the following day, the ritual was completed at the church with conditional baptism by the pastor, who, while performing the ceremony, was probably thinking that this delicate infant would not be long for this world. The parish register shows the following record. On August 10, 1845, we, the undersigned, have baptized conditionally Alfred, born the previous day, of the lawful wedlock of Isaac Bisset, carpenter, and Clotilde Foisy of this parish. The godfather is Edouard Bisset, and the godmother Josephine Foisy, uncle and aunt of the child, who, like the father, declare themselves unable to sign. P. A. Silvestre, pastor. Thanks to the mother's loving care, the child lived, but remained delicate throughout his life. The parents had been married at St. Matthias on September 27, 1831. The father, like St. Joseph, a carpenter and wheelwright, frequently moved from one place to another, as may be seen from the baptismal certificates of his numerous children. Brother André, being made a Christian in his cradle, did not become saintly after a sudden conversion in the manner of St. Paul, St. Augustine, or Père de Foucauld, and yet his spotless soul, in its expansion under God's watchful care, creates an interest just as fascinating, though not as striking, as did the souls of these great converts. Born of Canadian stock with its distinctly Catholic and French tradition, he is a genuine representative of his race. His holiness took its source in the heart of his mother, who was intent on making him from his very cradle an heir to heaven. Virtuous, meek, and hard-working, the mother of little Alfred proved herself an ideal Christian parent. At the knee of this illiterate woman of the people, he learned to lisp the names of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, along with those of Papa and Mama, and thus came to associate in his childish mind the love of his dear ones on earth with the love of the heavenly family. God gives divine grace in the sacrament of baptism. The parents have the duty of cultivating a spiritual mentality in their children in their earliest years. For the soul of a child is as wax to receive and as bronze to retain the first impressions of childhood. Destinies are almost always shaped at the knees of a mother. It is pleasant to picture the home life in that isolated cottage on its bit of land, noisy with the clamor of young children. The family remained at St. Gregoire for 3 years. But as each succeeding year brought with it another mouth to feed, the father was no longer able to provide for their wants. Hence he resolved to leave this humble home and take up residence in the little town of Farnham. There, for 2 years, he carried on the trade of wheelwright until he met with accidental death while felling a tree in the woods. His desolate wife was left as the sole provider for their 10 children. Alfred had only a faint remembrance of his father, but he retained a vivid picture of his mother, and loved to speak of her. Because I was sickly, my mother always showed me a deeper affection than she showed the others. She used to kiss me repeatedly and often gave me little dainties. During the family evening prayer, I used to kneel beside her and follow the rosary on her beads. My mother was always smiling, such a lovely smile. Even since her death, she often smiles at me. Sometimes I see her looking at me and loving me. Though she utters not a word, I seldom pray for my mother, but I often pray to her. Under the guidance of his beloved mother, his childish soul expanded freely. His piety was immediately remarkable. To those who, in later years, teased one of his sisters by insinuating that, after all, her brother was not such a great saint, and that he had been in his youth a good-for-nothing, she made retort, "You would not say that if you had known him in his early years. He used to spend endless hours praying in the church in Farnham." During the 4 years succeeding the death of the mother, she was able to provide for the needs of her family, but at length, weakened by privation and nightly toil, consumed by the ravages of tuberculosis, and slowly wasting away, she was forced to seek refuge with her sister, Madame Timothée Nadeau, who lived at Saint Césaire. Only Alfred accompanied her, the rest of the family being dispersed among charitable relatives. Comforted by the care of her sister and of her loving little son, the mother lingered for 2 years. When the end came, the children were brought to her bedside, and on November 10, 1857, she bade them a final adieu. With the lucidity of thought customary to the dying tuberculous sufferer, she was able to say to her children, "My dear ones, it is now 6 years since your father left you for heaven. The good God wishes me also to leave you. Pray for me. Do not forget the grave of your father. Let my body rest beside his in the cemetery at Farnham. From heaven I shall watch over you." Alfred shared in the distress of his dear mother over leaving her numerous children, whose little hands still clung to hers. All his life long he kept a vivid remembrance of the deathbed of his grief-stricken mother. These separations of his childhood rent his soul with sorrow, detaching him from fleeting worldly pleasures and enkindling within him a thirst for loving self-sacrifice. A mother's greatest concern is the future of her children, for she knows that these little ones, whose coming among us entails many tears and sacrifices, bear within them the seed of eternal life. At the hour of death, in the ecstatic encounter with the Lord, little Alfred's mother must have said, "I am but a poor woman, but through my humble efforts I have at least presented thee with 10 worshippers in whose hearts I have inculcated love for thee, in so far as my ignorance, my hard toil, and the shortness of my days on earth have allowed me. Lord, they are thine. Take care of them." It is easy to imagine the answer. These children will be your jewels in heaven. There you will behold your Alfred, surrounded by the souls he will have won by his prayers and his tears, and the many sinners he will have drawn back to God by his example. After the funeral, the weeping orphans were again separated. Alfred returned to his aunt, whose physical appearance and character kept him reminded of his dead mother. His uncle hid under a stern exterior a very compassionate heart. Alfred was always greatly attached to his foster parents, and certain extracts from his letters to them, after his entry into the religious life, manifest his lively affection for them. "Though I have found happiness in the state of life which I have embraced embraced, "My dear uncle and aunt, I have not forgotten my benefactors. If, my kind uncle, I have delayed so long in answering your letter, it was only that I might write to you for your patronal feast. As there is a general family custom of presenting a bouquet to the father on this day, I ask myself, what more precious and sweet-smelling bouquet could I give you than my gratitude for your many benefits? What richer bouquet could I offer than the remembrance of all your solicitude and care for me?" Generous but also robust and hardworking, Timothy Nadeau intended to make sturdy fellows of his own children, and of his adopted son as well. Able to earn a good living, the sensitive Alfred could not help but miss the attentions that his mother had lavished on him. Later, he admitted in a confidential way, and with his exquisite charity, "My uncle was a strong man, and he thought everyone else as robust as himself." It is easy to imagine the rugged peasant saying to the inconsolable orphan, "You have cried enough now. You are 12 years old and big enough to look out for yourself. When I was your age, I plowed the fields and earned my living. You must manage to get a livelihood, for we are not wealthy. As neither your health nor your ability permits you to go to school, I will have you begin your apprenticeship as a shoemaker." Alfred acquiesced willingly. In fact, all his life long he was to be engaged willingly in hard labor. Not only did he have but little strength, but he always overused what resources he had. One can easily imagine the courageous little lad setting to work with intense activity, bending all day long over the thick hide from which he was making sturdy shoes. Now and then he would prick himself with the awl or strike his finger with the hammer. Besides, he was tortured by those severe pains in the stomach that were to torment him all his life. From his own experience, he learned to have compassion on the suffering and the hardworking. Later on, recalling the time when, as a pale and sickly youth, he had been tied down to his wearisome trade, he confessed that his labor was beyond his strength. "You know, working in a cobbler's shop almost on all fours and hammering away all day long is not an aid to one's digestion." About that time, young Alfred made his first Holy Communion in St. Cecaire's Church. Fervent indeed must have been his first meeting with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, for the teachings of his pious mother were still vivid in his mind, and all his life long he was a devoted lover of the Holy Eucharist. Father Provençal, the parish priest, and a devout client of St. Joseph, prepared the boy for the great moment. No one could doubt Alfred's fidelity in following the catechetical instruction or in listening to the narratives of the gospel. He had already often thought of St. Joseph watching over the child Jesus, and he had made up his mind to imitate this saintly workman, for he also was to watch over the infant God, whom he carried at all times in his soul by divine grace, and whom he received with such deep piety in Holy Communion. A First Communion picture lets us see the appearance of the boy at that time. His pale, delicate face is lit by brilliant dark eyes, one a bit smaller than the other. His expression is a mixture of gentle introspection and eager energy. One evening Alfred was very ill. Madame Nadeau, while helping him into bed, noticed that he grimaced solely with pain while she undressed him, and asked, "What is that thing under your shirt?" "Oh, nothing much." "Let me see, my child." She uncovered a barbed leather cincture. Then she said, "But this is very foolish. With your miserable health, you should do sensible penance." "Dear aunt, it was a sacrifice I promised to make. Forgive me. I shall take it off." Filled with admiration, she took him in her arms and kissed him. Some time later, she took from him an iron chain he was wearing around his waist. To her reproaches, the child replied, "I shall take it off." True, he took it off, but he used his wit to find one new kind of penance after another. His adopted brothers mocked him for his penances and reported to their mother. "Alfred does not sleep in the bed, he sleeps on the floor. We saw him." "Is it true, Alfred?" When he nodded his head without saying a word, she said, "You will make yourself sick. Do not do that again." His little cousins, with the mercilessness characteristic of their age, liked to play pranks and then blame him for them. When alone, he often shed tears. But these trials and labors were God's way of preparing the boy for his future mission, that he might better serve as a model for the working classes. Divine providence ordained that he should work at various trades. After eking out a scanty living as an apprentice shoemaker, he gave up this occupation to work in a baker's shop. On April 5, 1860, Timothy Nadeau joined the gold rush to California with hundreds of other Canadians in a migration caused by the inability of the government at the time to protect and encourage the farmers, especially of the Quebec region. He had settled his family in Farnham, and Alfred, then aged 15, left to himself, became a hand on the Ouimet farm on the outskirts of town. Mother and child, though the boy was cheerful, obliging, and hardworking, he was, unlike most boys, fonder of prayer than of the hours of rest or on rainy days. He recited and dreamed about his beloved mother. The pastor of Saint Césaire had taught the boy to give special honor to Saint Joseph, and now he became accustomed to converse with this great saint. His devotion soon developed into an ardent love, which made his whole life an unceasing effort to imitate the model of the laborer. In Saint Joseph, he found the ideal he strove to reproduce, and the friend who guided him to sanctity. Even in those early years, the spiritual drive of Alfred's whole life began to appear in his two great devotions. By the radiance of example, Saint Joseph caused the interior life of his young apostle to flower into a tender love of Jesus crucified, a love modeled on and united to that of the foster father of the Savior. In the ascent towards God, Alfred progressed steadily without the least resistance to grace and always with heroic generosity. His employer, Mr. Ouimet, bought a crucifix at an auction. He noticed the boy fairly devouring it with his eyes, and hence he asked, "Would you care to have it?" "Oh, yes, indeed I would, sir." The gift was bestowed. Shortly after, noticing that Alfred lingered in the barn every evening after the long day's toil, the farmer went to find him one evening and discovered him kneeling before the crucifix, which he had fastened to a beam. Soon afterwards, the boy was noticed to be somewhat incapacitated in his work. Upon examination, the cause of his trouble was discovered. He was wearing a tight iron chain round his waist. At that time, an incident occurred which clearly shows his angelic purity. During an evening party, he observed that those present were becoming too boisterous. Despite sarcastic comments, he soon withdrew quietly. On his way home, while he was passing over a small bridge, he heard an unusual murmuring sound different from that of the brook babbling over its stony bed. Immediately the thought of his mother flashed into his mind, and he exclaimed, "Dear mother, if this sound is to warn me not to return to that place, let me hear it again." Again the sound rose distinctly to his ears. Without passing judgment on the value of this omen, we can at least conclude from the incident how the remembrance of his beloved mother saved him from peril while he was young and left to himself. When about 15 years of age, Alfred left Saint Césaire for Farnham. There he tried first to become a blacksmith, and in later years delighted in telling laborers who complained of their hardships how he used to shoe horses and work with iron. He was, however, soon compelled to leave this occupation, which was beyond his strength. He next found employment with Father Springer, the parish priest at Farnham, and in this new role, which brought him close to the altar, he had the opportunity to give free rein to his piety. When Alfred was 20 years old, he followed the example of hundreds of other young French Canadians, leaving his native province of Quebec to seek employment in New England. It was in the designs of God that he came to the United States, the better to be put personally to the test, and, more readily in the future, to spread the devotion to Saint Joseph. Later on, in fact, the work of Brother André was propagated even more widely in the United States than in Canada. At the time, although Alfred was 20 years old, he seemed, on account of his small stature and his thin, pallid face, no more than 16. His modest and recollected countenance glowed with the fire of divine love burning in his heart. He had long since grown accustomed to the practice of praying unceasingly during his work, and of conversing with his favorite saint, the workman of Nazareth. For 3 years, Alfred lived in the United States, working now on a farm, now in a factory. He worked successively in mills in the cities of Moosup, Hartford, and Phoenix. His precarious health forced him to alternate between the more remunerative work of the cities and the more healthful work of the country. Never discouraged, he struggled for his living, trying as much as possible to imitate the toilsome and prayerful life of his patron saint. His companions at work were greatly astonished at seeing him devote nearly all his spare time to prayer. When speaking of those days of exile, he liked to recount a dream that seemed to have some relation to his vocation. The life of Brother André bears a striking resemblance to that of Saint Joseph. So far as we know, there were hardly any ecstasies or other extraordinary phenomena, but there were a number of marvelous dreams. In this particular dream, Alfred was working in the field, and feeling very tired, he leaned on his rake and said to Saint Joseph, "Where shall I die?" At that moment, there loomed before his eyes a large stone building, such as he had not seen before. The remembrance of this incident remained deeply impressed in his memory. Many years later, he realized this dream picture to be an exact replica of Notre Dame College in Montreal. Though he did not actually die in that building, he spent 40 years of his religious life there, and there also he laid the foundation of his life work, the Oratory of Saint Joseph. Alfred Bessette was 23 years of age when he returned to his native land to live with relatives in the village of Sutton near the American border. While in Farnham and the United States, he had kept up a friendly correspondence with Father Provincial, a noble character whom divine providence had designed to guide him. A brother of Holy Cross, who was indebted to this holy priest for his vocation, paid him the following tribute. Father Provincial was a saint. All his parishioners were very fond of him, and the words engraved on his tomb near the church sum up his wonderful career. He was kind. He loved us. Father Provincial was a pastor beloved by all, and filled with solicitude for his flock. He used to carry his hat in his hand when he went out, because of the large number of salutations he had to exchange with the villagers. Would hasten to surround him whenever he appeared. Sometimes Alfred went to Saint Césaire and spent a few days at the rectory. Referring to his devotion to Saint Joseph, he declared, "When Father Provincial needed my services, he always looked for me in the church at the foot of Saint Joseph's statue." The boy had been left to himself from childhood, and yet, after 3 years of adventurous life in the United States, where it was at that time easy for a young stranger to lose the faith, he came home as pious and as ignorant of worldly pleasures as before his departure from Canada. The pastor of Saint Césaire was most solicitous about the education of youth. In 1869, he had a commercial college built and gave over its direction to the religious of Holy Cross. At the time of Alfred's visit to the parish priest, 6 brothers lived in the new boarding school, which was opposite the rectory. One day, Father Provincial asked Alfred, "Have you ever thought of becoming a religious, and living all your life in a house where there is a chapel in which you can assist at Holy Mass and receive Holy Communion?" "But don't you know, Father, that I cannot write or even read?" "What does that matter? Not all religious are teachers. In a congregation like the one that has come here, there are brothers who devote themselves to manual labor. Would you not like to become a religious of Holy Cross?" "Do you really think I have a vocation?" "I am convinced of it, my son. Pray to God that He may enlighten you." "Many thanks, Father. I shall think it over." Alfred examined the garb of these religious. Their black habit, similar to a priest's cassock, their Roman collar, their long woolen cincture with a tassel at the ends, and their plain wooden cross and medal of Saint Joseph. He discussed with them their manner of living and their special devotion to the Patriarch of Nazareth. The religious, however, did not urge him to enter the novitiate, for they were well aware of his delicate health, though they willingly gave him whatever information he desired. The Congregation of Holy Cross is composed of two distinct elements: the fathers and the brothers, representing the intimate union existing between Jesus and his foster father. The community was founded in Le Mans, France, by a holy priest, Father Basil Moreau, and at the request of Bishop Bourget of Montreal, a group of the religious were sent to Canada in 1847. By 1870, the Congregation of Holy Cross had many flourishing institutions. Among the brothers, there is a group who devote themselves to manual work in imitation of the life of Saint Joseph, their patron. Living in close union with God, many of these lay brothers have sanctified themselves in their obscure task of serving their fellow members. Less exposed to temptations of pride and freed from the all-absorbing solicitude of the preacher or the teacher, they find their work easily conducive to meditation on the life of the Master. Alfred Bessette was delighted at the prospect of such happiness. The religious life corresponded to the most secret yearnings of his vagrant youth. His urge for moving from one house, one farm, or one factory to another betrayed his restless longing to find a way of life in which he could do more directly for God. He now realized that his distaste for the world and the mysterious uneasiness which harassed him in his prayers were indications of a divine call to the religious state, and he burned with desire to embrace his vocation. In early autumn of the year 1870, he set out for Montreal. Scarcely 2 months earlier, the religious of Holy Cross had transferred their novitiate from Saint Laurent to a new establishment, opened the preceding year at Côte. Brother André, CSC. The Bellevue Hotel, a long wooden structure on the western slope of Mount Royal, was designed in a plain architectural pattern with a pediment and 4 columns. It had been converted into a combined college and novitiate. Alfred Bessette was received with open arms by Father Julien Gastineau, who held the twofold office of president of the college and master of novices. A letter from the pastor of Saint Césaire had already informed him about the newcomer. "I am sending a saint to your congregation." This testimonial from the priest, who had known the boy from infancy, was true in the full sense of the word. Alfred was not a heart tarnished and heavy with the pleasures of the world, nor was his mind surrendered to earthly allure. Rather, he brought to the religious life a heart desirous of attaining the highest supernatural ideal and already accustomed to the only delights that Jesus bestows on his privileged ones: trials, scourges, crosses. His soul was filled with the love of God, which swept him to ever higher levels. One can easily imagine the difficulties with which a young man of 25, who had long been his own master, had to cope in complying with the demands of religious discipline. At the very beginning, however, he showed himself to be a model of obedience, self-sacrifice, and piety. On December 27, 1870, after some weeks of trial, work, and prayer by way of preparation, he received the religious habit in that always impressive ceremony in which the young postulant gives himself to God. The priest who presided over the ritual addressed him thus: "Alfred Bessette, henceforth thy name will be Brother André," a name chosen as a mark of gratitude toward Father André Provençal. Little did he suspect that the young man before him was to become the founder of such a great work as the Oratory of Saint Joseph, and was destined to realize, through his efforts, the hope expressed by the curé of Ars. The Congregation of Holy Cross is destined, after many trials, to perform great works. That very year, Pope Pius IX declared Saint Joseph the patron saint of the Universal Church. In the solitude of the novitiate, Brother André set himself diligently to reproduce in his own life the teachings of Christ and to conform to the ideal set forth in the Gospel. This assiduous conformity in the most minute details of his life with the life of his divine exemplar was his chief concern during this year spent in solitary retreat that initiates into the religious life. In the attainment of virtue, he was greatly assisted by Father Gastineau, in whom he found an experienced and capable counselor. In the course of the following year, the religious at Saint Laurent College, being too few in number to meet all the demands of the institution, requested the help of the novices. Therefore, these novices were brought to live in the White House, an old building with whitewashed walls behind the college. Father Gastineau remained as superior of Cité des Neiges, and Father Guy became master of novices. Brother André was made linen keeper and infirmarian, and he also had the task of keeping the corridors neat and clean. Though such a novitiate was necessarily wanting in organization, Brother André did not cease to progress in sanctity. He was greatly assisted by a spiritual director of great merit, Father Huppier, who was held in such high esteem by all that, when he died 2 years later, his parishioners violently opposed the transfer of his remains to Montreal. Brother André held his memory in great veneration. Even in the novitiate, Brother André found a director excellently qualified to offer him spiritual guidance. Throughout the rest of his life, he was practically deprived of such help. Like a master sculptor who is jealous of his own glory in producing a masterpiece and allows his pupil only to rough hew, the Holy Ghost reserves the molding of saints in great part to himself. The little flower, for example, complained that she could never find a true director. Brother André, revering his spiritual father as a saint, declared one day, "Father Huppier appeared to me in a dream, and I asked him which prayer is the most pleasing to the good God. He recited the Our Father 3 times, and then added, 'You must often repeat, Thy will be done.' From this, I concluded that I would have to undergo great trials." To a religious to whom, contrary to his custom, he had been giving his confidence, he began thus to relate another tale. "Saint Francis of Rome has given me a good piece of advice." Then, seeing that someone was jotting down his words in a notebook, he stopped for fear of wounding humility. The Our Father, composed by our Lord himself, is indeed the most beautiful of prayers, and the repetition of the words, "Thy will be done," was really necessary for Brother André, for throughout his life he had to endure many difficult trials. After a few months spent in the novitiate, he saw his vocation endangered by the fact that his superiors feared he would be of but little use to the community because of his poor health, and thus decided to dismiss him. A long time afterward, Brother André related how, being in the greatest distress, he had at that time thrown himself at the feet of Bishop Bourget on the occasion when the prelate had come to visit the religious at Saint Laurent. The young novice, pale and sickly, somehow mastered his timidity and knocked at the bishop's door. The prelate, an old man with long white hair and the emaciated features of an ascetic, yet erect, despite his 72 years, welcomed the brother with kind and fatherly words, "What can I do for you, my son?" The novice, prostrate at the bishop's feet, with clasped hands and tearful eyes filled with anxious expectation, confided that his beautiful dream of becoming a religious had been frustrated, and that he was to be dismissed because of his lack of health. He avowed his love of God and his desire to serve him in the most humble occupations. "Do not fear, my dear son, you will be allowed to make your religious profession." Perhaps some presentiment of the future work of this novice had entered the bishop's mind when he looked down into the pleading, wistful face of the brother. He himself was beset with a strong desire for honoring Saint André, a project which he had not yet realized, of which he had already written these prophetic words: "We must have a church specially dedicated to his cult, in which he may receive daily the public homage worthy of his eminent virtues. We wish to consecrate all our strength and the rest of our life to making him honored in such a church, establishing there a place of pilgrimage where the people will come to him." By the mysterious guidance of divine providence, the bishop himself had gone to France in 1836 to ask Father Moreau to send a few religious to his diocese. The two godly men made a strange bargain. The founder of the Congregation of Holy Cross gave the bishop 9 of his subjects for Canada, and the prelate, as a token of gratitude, gave Father Moreau a precious relic that he had brought from Rome, the body of a 4-year-old martyr who had been put to death during the early persecutions. Perhaps the bishop foresaw that the religious family he had purchased with the remains of a saint would. Here is the corrected text. Prepare the chosen one of God, the founder of the great shrine dedicated to Saint Joseph. The novice left the bishop cheered and entirely consoled by so much kindness. Later, when relating this incident, he said, Bishop Bourget is now raised high in heavenly bliss. Pray to him often, indeed, he is high in heaven. Owing perhaps to the intervention of the holy bishop, the Father Master of Novices not long after whispered in the ear of Brother André, Do not be worried or afraid. I shall see to it that you are admitted to your vows. To justify himself, he declared, if this young man becomes unable to work, he can at least pray well. Before long, Brother André had the great happiness of making his first temporary vows. At the community mass, in the presence of the priest who held the sacred host above the ciborium, just before Holy Communion, he read the prescribed form which he had written in his unskilled hand. I, Joseph Alfred Bisset, Brother André, unworthy though I am, relying nevertheless on divine mercy and earnestly desiring to devote myself to the service of the adorable Trinity, make to Almighty God the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, according to the sense of the rules and constitutions of this congregation, in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ, of the Blessed Virgin Mary, conceived without sin, of her worthy spouse, Saint Joseph, and of all the heavenly court, promising to accept whatever employments it may please my superiors to entrust to me. His vocation to the religious life was then accomplished. That of his mission as the apostle of Saint Joseph was beginning. At the end of Brother André's novitiate, he was appointed porter at Notre Dame College, where he had begun his religious life. Cheerful and obliging, he soon became accustomed to this, his first appointment. He was to spend 40 years of his life in this house, where about 200 boys were entrusted to the care of a small number of religious. In his later years, he used to say of his appointment, At the end of my novitiate, my superiors showed me the door, and I stayed there for 40 years, without leaving. What had been the former Bellevue Hotel had given way to a large stone structure, like the one he had seen in a dream before entering the community. In 1881, the right wing of the college was built. In 1888, the central part and the chapel were constructed. And in 1890, the remainder of the building was completed. The visitor may still see the porter's cell near the parlor, a small room hardly 6 feet square, dimly lighted by a little window. The furniture includes a wardrobe, a small desk, a bench along the wall, a chair, and on the bare walls are a crucifix and a picture of Saint Joseph. A thinly upholstered couch serves as a bed. The religious in the house were very few in number. Brother André, like his confreres, was overloaded with a multitude of occupations. As porter, he had to answer the doorbell and look for the religious and the students who were called to the parlor. He had to awaken the religious at 5 o'clock in the morning, knocking at each door and saying the traditional Benedicamus Domino. During the day, he rang the bell for the various exercises, always with the strict punctuality which distinguished him all his life. Besides his duties as porter, he kept the parlor and 3 corridors neat and clean, and went on errands to the town and took care of the mail. Every Monday and Saturday, he drove to town with a horse and carriage for the students' laundry, which was done at the homes of their parents. In odd hours, he served as barber, and while cutting the hair of the pupils, he tried to awaken in them devotion to Saint Joseph, the father of the little Jesus. In the evening, he prepared the altar breads, made cinctures for the religious, and did any other available jobs, dedicating himself to self-forgetful activity and untiring devotion. The superior expressed a wish to have a lawn in front of the college, and Brother André immediately took on this task, often laboring at it until late in the evening. He said of this work, "Very late in the evening, I used to carry the stones I had dug out of the ground from a distance of several yards in my few leisure moments during the day. It is amusing now to note that, to avoid too much fatigue and waste of time, I used 2 wheelbarrows. I would push one for about 50 yards and then return to get the other, thus resting myself and also saying my rosary. Sometimes I was still working when the rooster crowed, and then I would go straight to ring the bell to awaken the community." Such zeal can evidently be considered excessive, but the excellent intention was to fulfill as soon as he could the wish of his superior. What appears strange to us in these later times is not at all out of order when we consider that the community was then making its difficult beginning in Canada. All these heroic sacrifices contributed to the sanctification of this humble servant of God. One is simply amazed at the amount of energy displayed by this little man, who could hardly digest a few mouthfuls of food. He was still tortured by severe pains in his stomach, but his health was the least of his concerns. He did his duty to the best of his ability and trusted all else to divine providence. His only food most of the time was a crust of bread dipped in milk and water. He ate at a corner of the table, alone, and in haste, since his occupation as porter did not allow him to eat at the same time as the rest of the community. Only a few of his confreres knew about these austerities, the superior not being among them. And yet Brother André never took advantage of his ill health to be relieved of any of his work. In later years, Brother André recounted these facts with his usual simplicity, not desiring sympathy for his sufferings, but trying to make clear that weakness does not prevent one with good will from working. "During 15 years, I never asked the help of a confrere, and I never refused anything which was asked of me. I accepted it all, and when I was unable to finish the work in the daytime, I did it at night." At the age of 43, he was exhausted from overwork. Toward the end of the summer, just before the beginning of fall classes, the college physician one day found him washing the windows in the parlor. He warned Brother André that unless he took a complete rest, he would die within 2 months. The little brother continued his work undisturbed. A few days later, the doctor caught him working as hard as ever. To his reprimand, Brother André retorted with a smile, "If I die, my community will be well rid of me." Thus he, upon whom so many duties devolved, far from thinking himself indispensable, considered himself a burden to his congregation. He was convinced that his vocation was such an inestimable grace that it could not be requited even by the most complete sacrifice of self. He liked to speak lightly of his labors, as, for example, when he once told some astonished sisters, "I had been scrubbing all night long, but this morning I received Holy Communion." One day, a lady who met him in the parlor said to him, "How different you look today, Brother André." "No wonder," he retorted, laughing. "I always change my clothes for Sunday." In the midst of his many occupations, he prayed incessantly. He liked to meditate on the sufferings of our Savior, and to converse with Saint Joseph. He was always very regular in the performance of his religious exercises, which most of the time he had to make privately because of his duties. After the morning prayer and meditation with the community, he used to hear Holy Mass, kneeling on the floor at the back of the chapel close to the door, so that he could hear the doorbell. There, like the publican in the Gospel, he remained motionless and deeply devout. Great was his joy when, during the day, a confrere would take his place at the door to free him for a short period. He would ask, "Will you please be kind enough to mind the door for me? I want to make a holy hour." "Yes, provided you do not remain too long." Brother André, altogether happy, would hasten to the chapel, where he would kneel on the floor at the entrance to the sanctuary. He had no notion of time when in the presence of his beloved. Finally, his substitute would come for him. "Brother, you have been here praying for 2 hours. That is surely enough." "Oh, just 5 minutes more, please." The other, unable to resist his pleading look, would go, but would have to return. "Now I've been waiting more than 15 minutes. I must go to teach my class." With profuse apologies and thanks, the little brother would reluctantly leave his prayer. One evening, after a long day's work, he knocked timidly at the door of a confrère, and then begged a great favor of him. "I am dying with fatigue, and so I fear I shall fall asleep. Will you kindly come and pray with me?" The other, a young priest, consented. But the prayer lasted so long that he was exhausted and declared that he would never be caught again. The next time he was asked, he alleged a pressing duty and refused. Brother André had recourse to someone else, but soon everyone avoided the invitation, having heard from the victims of the long duration of the prayers. Tired out as he was, especially on Wednesday and Saturday evenings when, after the usual day's work, he scrubbed the floor in the parlor, he performed his religious exercises in the chapel after the others had retired. There, in the darkness, he prayed and prayed until, overcome by fatigue, he fell asleep on his knees. Soon, however, he woke up and resumed his prayers, which he knew by heart. Sometimes this heroic struggle lasted till daybreak. Because the souls of religious remain young, they are interested in the most insignificant facts. A trifling incident occurred which informed the whole community about these nights spent in prayer. The porter one night fell asleep in the chapel, which was illuminated only by the pale light of the sanctuary lamp. All at once, he started up out of his sleep. He saw a ray of light filtering through the small round window, communicating with an empty room above the apse. Then he thought he heard a noise, and was frightened. He hastened to go and knock at the door of a confrère. "Come with me, brother," he said. "There are some thieves above the chapel." The other religious hastily accompanied Brother André to the chapel, and after a careful investigation, discovered that the lantern of the supposed marauder was only the freakish reflection of the moon creeping through the window. One of the confrères decided to lock the door in order to prevent Brother André from going into the chapel at night. Then he hid himself to witness the discomfiture of the little doorkeeper. But to his amazement, he saw the latter entering the chapel without difficulty. When he related this strange fact to others, they laughed at what they considered his naivete. The pupils, with their keen discernment, soon detected the little tricks played on the porter, and made them the frequent subject of their conversation. With apparent guilelessness, they began to ask their teachers various questions, their secret purpose being to find out who was for and who was against Brother André. These boarding school incidents of 1890 have been handed down to us by an eyewitness, then 10 years old, who was attending the school as a day pupil and was preparing for his first Holy Communion. Sometimes the porter gave letters to the boy to be posted and occasionally conversed with him. One day the boy asked Brother André, "Where were you going last night? I saw you climbing up the mountain." "I went to pray to Saint Joseph. It is so quiet there." "And you do go alone, brother?" "Yes. Would you like to come with me?" "Yes, I would very much, brother." "Then ask permission of your mother, and come and meet me after supper." The boy, rejoicing, came at the appointed time. They climbed up a narrow footpath until they reached a small clearing. Then they knelt near a tree. "I have concealed a medal of Saint Joseph here. Let us pray that we may be able to buy this piece of land." From that day on, they came regularly to the same spot. Brother André would tell the boy, "We will obtain this piece of land. Saint Joseph needs it." Brother André could not be content with merely working hard, leading an exemplary life as a religious, and then saying after the day's toil, "I have done enough for thee, Lord. It is not for me, an ignorant man, to preach the word of God and propagate devotion to Saint Joseph." No, the little brother knew more of love than that. He loved with all his soul so intensely that his love flowed from his own heart into the hearts of others. This workman can be a model for all Christians who comprehend their religion and wish to save the souls of others by the humble means within their power. When he asked his confrères to unite with him in prayer, it was only a pretext to promote in them the great devotion that God inspired in him. One day, the bursar said to him, "Brother Andre, can you explain why it is that every time I put things in order in my office, I find my little statue of Saint Joseph turned towards the mountain? It is because he wants to be honored there." Brother Andre was always ready to do a kind act or give a word of counsel. His countenance beamed with a genuineness and a youthfulness of mind which attracted the pupils to him. Mischievous as all boys are, they sometimes took unfair advantage of his kindness, but they loved him. He spoke to them of the supernatural with a simplicity and warmth of conviction that won them. The parents of the pupils also enjoyed talking with him, telling him their troubles and imploring his prayers, which they found very efficacious. At this time he began his charitable work on behalf of the sick, to whom he was known as Good Brother Andre. His daily rounds to the post office gave him an opportunity to call on the sick. On the occasion of these visits, he would give the suffering some of the oil that had been burned in front of the statue of Saint Joseph in the college chapel. The members of his congregation paid attention at the time to this original project, but the people among whom he visited began to venture timidly the idea, "Brother Andre is a saint. He can heal the sick." Thus far, his confreres knew nothing about this power of the little brother. One day, when the porter intended to be away longer than usual, he got a young brother to take. Here is the corrected text without page numbers. Unfortunately, while the substitute was present for a few moments, a visitor arrived unexpectedly. Hearing the doorbell ring several times, the superior, Father Louagie, an impetuous Frenchman born in the south of his country, came down from his office and made the whole house resound with the bell. The young brother, much dismayed, soon appeared, and Brother Andre came in at that very moment to find the house in an uproar. The superior exclaimed, "I am provincial, superior, bursar, and now I am expected to be doorkeeper. Kiss the floor, kiss the floor, kiss the floor, Brother Andre." Without a word of defense, the little brother performed the act of humility. This superior had a great reputation for virtue, for he was in truth endowed with a noble heart, and was remarkable for his exactitude in observance of the rule. Though he had a very irascible temperament, his subjects loved him, for they knew he hid a paternal heart under his impetuous exterior, and they made him the object of many pleasant jibes. They called Brother Andre the lightning rod of the college, for on him fell the thunderbolts of Father Louagie's displeasure. Never did Brother Andre try to explain his conduct or to exonerate himself from accusations. His duties as porter often exposed him to receive reprimands from some of his confreres, such as, "Instead of passing your time in prayers, you should be doing your duty. Why did you not call me to the parlor when someone came for me?" The good brother might have answered, "I went all through the college without finding you. If you stayed in your room when you should, this would not have happened. The superior told me not to summon anyone to the parlor under such circumstances." Brother Andre, however, received the scolding humbly, his head bowed as if he were indeed guilty, and without a word of self-defense. Those who saw this have said, "We marveled at his sweetness and humility. In his place we would surely have defended ourselves, but he never spoke a word." It often happens that God permits the faults of others as a means of sanctification for his elect. Saint Teresa, who had much to suffer in her cloister, used to say, "By whom can God sanctify us if not by those with whom we live?" To the daily trials of the monastic life, to habitual mortifications such as sleeping on the bare floor, fastings, nights spent in work and prayer, and putting up with the difficult young, Brother Andre added a multitude of sacrifices which he had been practicing since his childhood. For illustration that one need not be over-delicate with oneself, he declared, "During the winter nights, I used to take baths in ice-cold water in the blacksmith's shop, and sometimes plunged naked into the snow behind the college. These penances may have been means of fighting against the temptations with which the devil, who knew how much good Brother Andre was doing, assailed him. Soon, however, discouraged by vain efforts, Satan gave up his attacks of this kind and confined himself in peevish impotence to giving the little brother a great deal of trouble physically, as he is wont to do with the saints. A narrative from Brother Andre has brought this to light. Accustomed as he was to live always in the supernatural, he related the following fact to prove how God, in his goodness, rewards the virtue of obedience, totally unconscious in his simplicity of the luster it would give himself. As he often took care of the sick, healing them or preparing them to die, the people in the vicinity became accustomed to ask him to lay out their dead. One Sunday morning, a boy called on Brother Andre to tell him that his grandfather, whom he had promised to prepare for burial, had just died. "I will go about 7 o'clock," answered the brother, whom obedience retained at the college. The boy went home, but his parents sent him back to tell Brother Andre, "You must come immediately, otherwise the corpse will become too rigid to be dressed." "I cannot go now, so you will have to wait till evening. I am not allowed to leave the college on visiting days." At supper time, having finished the day's work, Brother Andre went to the home of the deceased and found the body still warm and flexible. He put the remains into the coffin without the least difficulty. Then, noticing that the head was somewhat inclined, he tried to put it into the proper position, but found the operation very difficult, for at that moment the rigidity of death had set in. On his return to the college, he said his endless prayers and then retired to his room, which was isolated from those of his confreres, as they lived on the floor above. When he had entered his room, he heard in the adjoining refectory a deafening noise, as if glasses, cups, and plates were being knocked together and broken to pieces. He rushed into the dining room and made a light. To his amazement, he found that everything was in its proper place, and nothing was broken. This same strange sound occurred again on several occasions, and finally Brother Andre declared, "Every time I go to lay out a corpse, I hear that noise." Sometimes he also saw a strange animal, a sort of huge black cat, which seemed to cause the unusual noise. The presence of such a creature was inexplicable, and so he concluded, "The devil, enraged on account of my errands of mercy, is trying to frighten me." There are doubtless many who, on reading these facts, can hardly refrain from smiling, being inclined to dismiss as legendary the intervention of the devil in the lives of the saints. It will be interesting for them to read the life of the Curé of Ars, to which that of Brother Andre has many similarities, for they will find that the evil one used to vent his anger in the same childish fashion against the saint who was snatching from him so many souls. Oftentimes, the devil appeared to him in the form of an animal and produced a noise that was like the tearing of curtains, sheets, and pillow slips. That Brother Andre endured such vexations many times may be inferred from confidences given by him on various occasions. Thus did God's chosen one prepare himself for his great vocation by prayer, sufferings, and trials of all kinds. This hidden life was the season of sowing, when he planted the seed that was to blossom during the time of his public life as an apostle of Saint Joseph. Brother Andre was 34 years old when the Saint of Lourdes, 1 year his senior, died. Bernadette's mission had long since been realized, and pilgrims were flocking to the rock of Massabielle, the sanctuary of the Immaculate Virgin. Through the mysterious ways of Providence, the Apostle of Saint Joseph had to wait 25 years more before seeing his mission accomplished. Bernadette, to carry out her purpose, had only to bear witness to the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin, and then, when at last she had made her voice heard through many difficulties, she was able to retire into the seclusion of a convent. In the case of Brother Andre, it was the miraculous power of working cures in the name of Saint Joseph that made it possible for him to fulfill his mission, which he pursued closely to the very end of his life. For 33 years, he watched over its development, being considered in the public eye the faithful imitator of the carpenter of Nazareth, though from his earliest years. Brother Andre had cherished a special devotion to his great friend, Saint Joseph, and had, from the very beginning of his religious life, labored by every means to spread the devotion. It was only when he was granted the extraordinary faculty of bestowing divine gifts that his mission began. What the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin were to the work of Bernadette, the power of miracles was for Brother Andre. Little by little, this power was made manifest, but those around him were slow to perceive it. The power of his intercession first availed among his confreres and the students. Some events, which they did not initially recognize as supernatural, were nevertheless engraved in their memories and related afterward. The college bursar, a model religious who shared with Brother Andre the dubious honor of being styled Father Luigi's lightning rod, had been confined to his bed for over 2 months due to an injury to his leg. Some days before the 19th of March, he said to the porter, "There is no improvement in my condition. I positively believe I shall not be able to go down to the chapel to celebrate the feast of Saint Joseph. Make the novena with me, have faith, and be assured you will be able to go to the chapel," was the porter's response. On the morning of the feast, all the religious were astonished to see among their ranks the patient who had been seriously ill in bed the day before. After Mass, they were assured that there remained no trace whatever of his illness. Brother Andre was no less solicitous for the pupils, and of these, the orphans were the first to receive the kind attentions and devotedness of his compassionate heart. Those among them who were ill sometimes benefited from his powerful intercession. In conversation with intimate friends, the little brother, while recalling the beginning of his career at Notre Dame College, related the following incident. A pupil suffering from a malignant fever had been confined to bed in the infirmary for several days. During recreation, the porter rallied at the infirmary and said with a smile, "What are you doing here, you lazy boy? I'm sick. Get up. The doctor ordered me to stay here. But you are not sick anymore. Go on out for recreation." The child, already feeling better, did not need to be told twice. He dressed and ran out to romp with his fellow pupils, much to the astonishment of the recreation master. An inquiry was made, and Brother Andre was charged with imprudence and interference in the functions of the infirmarian. "But the boy is not sick," was his ready answer. "Have him examined." The doctor examined the boy and found no trace of the illness. Thoroughly puzzled, he came back several times that day, and finally could not doubt the permanence of the cure. An epidemic of smallpox had broken out in the community at Saint Laurent, and the infirmary in the White House, the former novitiate, was filled with patients, both pupils and religious. A few died. Father Baudet, the superior of the college, undertook the responsibility of nursing the quarantined patients. Brother Andre assisted the superior with pleasure. Fearless of contagion, though, because of his own weakness, he might easily have caught the disease. Upon entering the quarters of the sick, he fell on his knees and prayed to Saint Joseph to remove the scourge. No further case of smallpox broke out, and all the sick were restored to health. Yet but slight attention was paid to these facts. In everyone's opinion, the porter continued to be the humble little brother who was a bit eccentric. Little by little, however, the pupils and their parents became greatly attracted by the sweet simplicity and unvarying cordiality of the brother who opened the door for them. During the long afternoons that the mothers spent in the parlors with their children, the less patient fathers came to smoke and to talk with the porter in his small room. The brother, in conversations seasoned with much wit, profited by these opportunities to speak of his great devotion. People formed the habit of telling him about their troubles. He who had suffered so much himself understood them well and was easily moved to sympathy, while he gave them his own good counsel. He also reminded them of Saint Joseph, the consoler who is so powerful with the heart of Jesus. The genial doorkeeper welcomed every visitor with great amiability, One day, meeting a man with a sad and preoccupied appearance, he asked, "How are things going at home?" "What does that matter to you?" replied the stranger in an irritable and boorish manner. The rebuff did not bother Brother André. As soon as the man had taken leave of his 2 children, the porter accosted him with a smile. "You seem to be in a bad humor today." The visitor, by way of apology, began to tell him about his troubles. "My wife is sick in bed, and has been so for many years." "But she is not so sick as you think," the brother answered simply. "In fact, she is anxious to see you come home and to hear about her children." Then, shaking hands with the amazed man, he added, "At this very moment she became better." The visitor went away muttering, "What a queer prophet that porter is." He went home as fast as his horse could carry him. His wife, still pale from her long illness, was standing on the doorstep, smilingly waiting for him. "How are the children?" she cried out gaily as he approached. At the very moment when her husband had been talking to Brother André, she had suddenly felt better, and had insisted that her nurse help her to rise. The latter had obeyed reluctantly. A few moments later, the woman had left her room to go to the balcony, where she anxiously awaited her husband's return. More and more favors, spiritual as well as temporal, happened daily, and the report of them spread, so that visitors began to come especially to beg for the help of the saintly brother. One of his confreres witnessed a strange scene. I am ready to certify by oath the truth of this incident. One Saturday late in November 1884, I took the place of Brother André, who had to scrub the floor in the parlor. About 5 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody rang the doorbell. A lady, supported on the arms of 2 men, was brought in. I asked what they wanted. One of the men replied, "This lady wants to see Brother André." The porter was at that moment on his knees scrubbing the entrance to the college. "Brother André, this lady wishes to speak with you." He paused in his work and asked, "What can I do for you?" "I am suffering from rheumatism. I want you to heal me." "Let her walk." She began to walk a few steps, and the brother kept scrubbing the floor. After a moment he said to the lady, "You are no longer sick. You may go home." She went out unassisted. Thus, 20 years prior to the beginning of Brother André's great work, he already gave evidence of God's predilection. But he gave no sign at that time that he was preparing the erection of a shrine consecrated to Saint Joseph. Opposite the college there was a small glade. Farther on, up the craggy mountainsides, the pale green of maples, oaks, and birches contrasted with the darker shades of the firs and pines. Here and there amid the groves extended patches of wasteland covered with brushwood. This site dominated the plain as far as the slightly elevated skyline of the blue Laurentians in the distance. From the mountain heights, farms, groves, and villages could be seen, their steeples pointing heavenwards, and the meandering Rivière des Prairies, with its banks bordered by trees. Lake St. Louis, in the westerly direction, fed by the St. Lawrence River, gave the whole landscape a vivid appearance. The religious, especially the novices, often ventured along the pathway far up the mountain. The owner of the land, a man of an irascible nature, denied everyone admittance to this picturesque spot, and sometimes set his dogs on the intruders' heels. But for the novices, who, upon taking the cassock, had not ceased to be fond of boyish pranks, this prohibition only added zest to the expedition. On holidays, they generally slipped away to the top of Mount Royal. After a few moments of healthful recreation, they would recite the office of the Blessed Virgin near a solitary birch tree which shaded a bare esplanade on the mountainside. The authorities of the college were desirous of possessing this piece of land, for they feared that some disorderly element might be built there. The purchase price was too high, however. The property was meantime sold to a French Canadian who also asked too much for it. Then an act of childlike faith succeeded when all human procedures had failed. Brother Alderic, the bursar, who entertained a most filial devotion to the workman of Nazareth, especially since he had been cured through the intercession of Brother Andre, hid in the coveted ground a medal of Saint Joseph. At least 6 years previously, the humble porter, driven by the desire of erecting a shrine here, had, without saying a word about it, done the same thing. In later life, he recommended this act of faith in Saint Joseph as a means of evicting refractory proprietors. On July 22, 1896, the purchase was made. The devoted porter was the first to begin the work. He immediately started to widen the footpath and to make steps up the steep hills. Above the abrupt ascent of the mountain spur was a glade of young shoots that the workers christened St. Joseph's Boulevard. Father Zaphand, who was supervising the work, carved that name in his fine handwriting on the steep side of a mountain bordering the spot. The following year, a small pavilion was built of rough-hewn timber. A ladder gave access to the roof, which overlooked the beautiful landscape across the trees. Brother Andre had thus far said nothing about erecting a chapel in honor of Saint Joseph, but he placed a small statue of his dear saint in a crevice of the rock, and there, in his spare moments, he used to pray. He also placed a small dish at the foot of the statue to receive the donations of casual pilgrims. When the parlors were crowded with visitors, he would talk about his projects with his friends, suggesting to them that they climb up to St. Joseph's Boulevard to see the magnificent view, and advising them to say a little prayer near the statue in the rock. How charming was this first shrine, so humble and so unpretentious. Just a narrow path entangled with brushwood, a small statue, and an old dish wherein coins were to be deposited. What a touching scene of beauty was this rustic simplicity. And so it was with the pennies of the poor that Brother Andre was to build his first chapel, as well as the future crypt and the basilica, one of the finest temples in America. Small donations came in gradually, and the porter, with the permission of his superiors, saved them for the place of pilgrimage of which he had long dreamed. From time to time, he added to the sum the 5 cents he earned for cutting a student's hair. Poor as he was and indifferent to earthly possessions, he made no distinction between the smallest coins and very liberal offerings, but received either with manifest joy. "It is all for Saint Joseph," he said as he counted a few small coins. The influence of the apostle of Saint Joseph on the people became more and more obvious. Every day brought its contingent of sick and afflicted, to each of whom he gave a hearty welcome and consoling words. To all he spoke of Jesus and his foster father. One day a young man came to him, leaning on the arm of another. "Do you recognize me, Brother Andre? You are my little companion who used to come and pray with me on the mountain. How are you?" "Not at all well. About a month ago I had an accident while working. The doctor says I must go to the hospital. I have been told that my leg will have to be amputated, for it has become gangrenous. You have the power to cure me if you wish, Brother Andre." "No, not I, but Saint Joseph, if you have faith. Send back your carriage." To protect the cripple from the gaze of the curious, Brother Andre escorted him into a small chamber. In the evening, when no one could observe and criticize him, he brought the young man into his own room and rubbed the injured leg for a few moments. Swollen and black though it had grown, the limb became absolutely sound. So much so that the patient was able to walk home alone, even though the roads were covered with icy, slippery snow. Miracles became more and more numerous and were noised abroad in spite of the wonder workers' recommendation to say nothing about them. History, forever repeating itself, records an episode in the Bible. The Lord said to Satan, "Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a man simple and upright, and fearing God, and avoiding evil, and still keeping his innocence?" Job chapter 1 verse 3. Then God permitted Satan to try his servant. It would seem that the evils of suffering inflicted on Job were repeated in the life of Brother Andre. Throughout his youth as a poor man without friends, he was tossed about from one house to another and was constantly tortured with pain. In the religious life, he was tried by rigid and stern superiors, while the condition of his health became steadily worse. Sometimes he, who was permitted to heal others, had to spend a few days in the infirmary, suffering from heartburn and racked by the convulsive spasms of chorea. Now another sharp distress tore his soul with anguish. Everything seemed to unite to paralyze his influence. Some of the parents of the children attending the school protested because of the number of sick and afflicted persons who came to the college to seek help from Brother Andre. The authorities, yielding to these remonstrances, strictly forbade the porter to receive his supplicants during visiting hours and compelled him to meet them in a shabby little building on the other side of the street, opposite the college. They feared, on the one hand, to bring discredit upon their community through being led astray by a religious who, though fervent, was illiterate and eccentric, and on the other hand, to thwart the possible designs of Providence. Archbishop Bruchesi of Montreal was in the same dilemma. He asked them, would Brother Andre stop receiving the sick if you should tell him to do so? He would obey blindly. Then let him alone. If his work is from God, it will live. If not, it will crumble away. Not all were animated by the same spirit of tolerance. A few confreres, and especially the village doctor, openly opposed the healer, hurling at him such nasty epithets as fake healer and quack doctor. Brother Andre continued the work without losing courage, though he often shed tears and poured forth his sorrow into the heart of a confrere who inspired him with confidence. He told him of his hopes and expressed his. Here is the corrected text with the page numbers removed. That not having the help of a priest to hear the confessions of those who came to him, this companion witnessed many touching scenes during the few days he spent repairing the hovel in which Brother Andre would henceforth receive the clients of St. Joseph. Far from being satisfied with their partial victory, the disparagers went to the Archbishop's palace to state their grievances. A few confreres and the beneficiaries of Brother Andre's favors stood by the accused. The prelate, Archbishop Bruchesi, with his usual prudence, dismissed both parties without letting them know his own sentiments. Vexed at getting no support from the ecclesiastical authorities, the opponents then appealed to the civil authorities, claiming the Board of Health must absolutely take cognizance of this matter, for public health is at stake. A delegate was sent by the Board of Health to bring this matter to his senses. Brother Andre received him courteously and explained that his remedies, involving the afflicted being blessed with a medal or with a bit of oil, were by no means harmful. The delegate departed, greatly pleased at the brother's common sense and urbanity. To these trials were added calumnies attacking his reputation. Because he touched the sick in healing them, enemies charged him with immodesty. This insult was even thrown into his face by a visitor to whom he had manifested much kindness and sympathy. Assaulted by such odious slanders, suspected in his own community, relentlessly attacked by outsiders, harassed in every way, he at last sought consolation in a layman who seemed to empathize with him. In this man, he placed the utmost confidence, trusting to him the secrets of his heart, and sometimes shedding tears in his presence. This confidant, unfortunately, was an unworthy person, incapable of loyalty and still more incapable of understanding the great, straightforward soul of his venerable friend, and he divulged the secrets entrusted to him. As he understood nothing of the action of the Holy Ghost in noble souls, he took Brother Andre for a fool. Joining the brother's adversaries, he began to circulate the worst calumnies. Finally, his treachery was made known. Brother Andre, who was very sensitive and of exquisite delicacy and absolute trustworthiness in matters of friendship, felt the wound keenly for a long time. My best friend, whom I trusted implicitly, has betrayed me. He has divulged everything I told him. You cannot imagine all the sorrow he has caused me. The devil was indeed infuriated against a work that gave the promise of so much spiritual regeneration. These trials, however, but served to give more luster to the patience, humility, meekness, obedience, and indomitable energy of the servant of God. In the midst of the storm, a ray of light appeared in the darkened sky. Permission was given to erect the first shrine to Saint Joseph. At the end of the summer of 190, Brother Abondius, the college carpenter, built on the promontory, halfway up the mountain, a small chapel 18 by 15 feet. There were no windows. The sun rays filtered through a double pane of ground glass extending along the arras of the roof. That miniature oratory, with a folding door in front, looked like a lantern lost on the side of the mountain. Brother André liked to recall an event which took place when the work began. A man came to see me at the college. He was so thin that one could almost see through him. He suffered from cancer in the stomach and could scarcely eat. I said to him, "Will you come and work for me tomorrow morning? We must widen the road to the chapel in the mountain." He replied, "I would be only too glad to do so, but I have not the strength to work. I cannot eat." "All right, come anyhow and have breakfast with me tomorrow." The following day I served him a good meal. The very same day he found himself able to work. All trace of his sickness had vanished. I kept him in my service for several months. The 19th of November, 1904, was a day of exultation. The statue of Saint Joseph was blessed in the college chapel, and was then carried in procession to the sanctuary, where Holy Mass was celebrated and the Stations of the Cross were erected. Let us pass over the numerous participants in this scene to contemplate, though perhaps the least in external rank, him whose story we are relating. Brother André was approaching his 60th year. He appeared at this time as a shrewd little old man, thin and hollow-eyed from illness and mental suffering, with curly hair turning gray, and yet with an air of irrepressible youth in his erect carriage, in his face and eyes, and especially in his smile. Wholly forgetful of his own struggles and troubles, he enjoyed the triumph of his loved friend, the workman of Nazareth. This day it did not matter that his mission was far from being fully approved, and that his superiors merely tolerated his activity among the sick. Scarcely was the chapel inaugurated when it had to be closed for the dreary winter months. By way of recompense, Brother André transformed into a shrine a nook adjoining the recreation hall. A few privileged ones came from time to pray before a statue of Saint Joseph placed in a niche. They also made the way of the cross in the chapel with the brother porter, who made a silent meditation at each station and said a few prayers composed extemporaneously. This religious exercise was often performed in the evening in the darkness. On one occasion, a visitor who knew nothing of the custom entered the chapel. A few pilgrims, who had been concealed from his sight by the pews behind which they were kneeling, just then arose and proceeded to the next station. When the visitor saw these figures emerging from the obscurity, he jumped up and shrieked, to the amusement of them all. Brother André often gazed longingly across the barren landscape at the oratory on the mountain, hooded with snow. Occasionally he went there, being greeted on the way by the children, who shouted and laughed as they slid down the snow-clad slopes. The sick, being no longer permitted access to the college, sought meager shelter in the small building on the other side of the road, and waited till the porter could spare a few moments from his work to come to see them. With the return of spring, visitors began to arrive in crowds. One afternoon, there were about 100 visitors scattered among the trees over the campus of the college. Brother André was raking the aisles between the flower beds and apparently took no notice of them. At last, a lad ventured to approach him, only to be told, "Go and wait for me at the oratory. I shall join you there when I am free." During the holidays, when he could easily find a substitute porter, he spent entire days receiving visitors. Later, he confessed, "Not infrequently I did not take the trouble of eating breakfast. I slipped a few biscuits into my pocket and went to the oratory. Sometimes, when I came back in the evening, I realized that I had forgotten to eat them." As the years passed, the storm raged over his head more furiously than ever. Doctors and certain members of the religious community waged a desperate struggle against him. Up and down the city, skeptics made fun of the old fool who pretended he could work miracles. Visitors to the college complained that the sick were blocking up the small station in front of the building. Wearied by all these remonstrances, his superiors thought of sending Brother Andre to another mission of their congregation, the University of St. Joseph in New Brunswick. Oftentimes, the little brother shed bitter tears, but he never lost courage. Rather, he declared, "What consoles me is to see that each great sorrow is followed by a new development at the oratory." One group of the religious defended Brother Andre warmly and went to Father Dion, the provincial, to ask him to enlarge the sanctuary, to heat it, and make it accessible in winter. This request was not considered opportune, however. Proceedings at the diocesan center were not more successful. This prudent reserve, quite legitimate on the part of authority, nonetheless served to show the divine character of Brother Andre's mission, and when at length Archbishop Bruchesi and Father Dion were won over to the little saint's side, they became his staunchest supporters. In the meantime, the people on all sides extolled the miracle worker of Mount Royal. Numerous pilgrimages were organized, opposition crumbled away, and soon the work was openly triumphant. As yet, the organization of it was like a half-opened flower, a bud that had suffered from frost. Soon, however, the rays of a beneficent sun were bringing it to its full bloom. We shall give here only the main events in the prodigious development of the oratory. Since it is not so much the history of the work as the life story of its founder that interests us, we shall suppress all superfluous details, the better to bring into relief the personality of Brother Andre. After the erection of the first chapel, the good religious continued for 4 more years to serve as porter of the College of Notre Dame. Whenever he had a free moment during the day, he went to join the visitors who awaited him, and frequently in the evenings, holding a lantern in his hand, he took a few privileged individuals to his little sanctuary, which was kept closed all winter, even on the feast of St. Joseph. In 1906, a group of laymen, friends of Brother Andre, petitioned the provincial superiors to undertake the construction of a church in honor of St. Joseph, but the project was deemed premature. In July 1908, a shelter, consisting merely of a roof supported by posts, was erected, thus extending the original shrine to the rocky mountainside. 2 months later, half of this structure was walled up to form the nave of a church, of which the primitive chapel became the sanctuary. From this time on, the oratory was heated during the winter, and thus was made accessible to pilgrims throughout the year. In the spring of 1909, a pavilion was built. It included a restaurant and restroom for pilgrims, and a small cell and office for Brother Andre, who was henceforth relieved of his work as porter at the college, and was officially appointed guardian of the oratory. The following year, the nave was again enlarged, and the original chapel, now too small for the nave, was proportionately lengthened at the other end. The ground floor of this part was made into the sacristy. A small room for Brother Andre was furnished under the roof. A steeple, in which was hung a large bell, towered above the structure. Though humble in proportions, the oratory, situated high on the mountain in a spot of great natural beauty, presented a striking spectacle. On every side, nature in its wild and rugged aspect charmed the eye of the beholder. Trees, stalwart and erect like giant sentinels keeping guard, trees gnarled and bent, trees inviting rest under their broad, umbrageous branches, rambling mazes of undergrowth and thorn bushes, shrubs of brilliant hues, wild wood flowers and clinging vines creeping in exuberant profusion from the crevices of the thickly carpeted slopes, and veiled in hazy purple beyond the fair expanse of plain and suburbs the distant mountains. The shrine was taking on new life, and rapid developments were exceeding all anticipations. At this time, a presbytery was built, and again it was necessary to enlarge the nave of the church, this time until it extended to the shelter built against the mountain. In November 1912, Archbishop Bruchesi of Montreal came to bless this addition and then addressed the crowd gathered within the edifice. Here I behold a pious enterprise which fills me with hope. This oratory may justly be compared to the mustard seed, which is the least of all, and yet grows into a great tree. In the beginning, a simple and trusting hand placed a statue here. Then daily prayers were offered before it, and soon a little chapel was built to house it. Then, as the clients of St. Joseph became more and more numerous, his shrine had to be enlarged again and yet again. It is this latest addition I have come to bless today. Yet the work is only in its infancy. I look into a future, a not too distant future, to see a basilica worthy of St. Joseph rising here on Mount Royal and facing the most magnificent of horizons. The period of uncertainties and hesitations had at length come to an end. With blind confidence in Providence, the plan for an imposing granite basilica was conceived, one that would vie with the mountain itself in majesty. In 1915, while the World War was destroying many of the churches of Europe, a vast stone crypt, resembling a huge bastion, was erected on Mount Royal. The bell tower and the sanctuary of the first humble oratory were brought there, thus preserved to form, as it were, the head and the neck of that body of stone made up of successive sections. The structure was set in a vast French style, with a statue of St. Joseph within the open walls, and he will soon provide a shelter for himself. Topping Mount Royal, with a high uplifted head, looms the dome of the basilica, its inspiration having been drawn from the celebrated Dome of Florence, designed by Brunelleschi. Owing to the possibilities of modern building materials, however, a contemporary master in architecture conceived a plan of much greater scope and daring. The interior of the sanctuary, when completed, will be a vast movement of harmoniously ascending lines, an incomparable symphony in warm-colored mosaics and stained glass windows. From the small cupola at the summit of the dome, one can look out over the city below, swarming with its 1.5 million human beings. To the east, far beyond the St. Lawrence River, Mount St. Gregoire overshadows the birthplace of Brother André. To the west, on the immense plain extending as far as the sinuous smoky skyline of the Laurentians, are two more points fraught with memories: Notre Dame College and Saint Laurent College, for in them lived the artisan who not only built the great sanctuary to the patron of the Universal Church, but also popularized devotion to him in America as well. Numerical figures are dry but eloquent with truth when they testify as witnesses. These figures bear witness to the importance of the work of the oratory. More than $10 million have been spent on it. Every year, an average of 200,000 letters come to the oratory from the four corners of the world, asking for prayers and favors. 250,000 copies of *The Annals of St. Joseph, a monthly review, are printed with each issue. One confraternity includes more than 30,000 members. Visitors to the shrine number in the millions every year. Though the splendor of the site may account in part for the flow of tourists, it could not suffice as an explanation for the continual arrivals of thousands of pilgrims from all parts of America. Frequently, a lone pilgrim going up to the shrine to pray suddenly disappears amid a newly arrived pilgrimage. From the heart of the city, Spalpater sometimes winds its way through the noise and bustle of the streets towards Mount Royal. Certain organizations, such as that of the Christian Laborers, bring in a human tide. On these occasions, as many as 50,000 visitors transform the terraces into a moving panorama of variegated colors. Upon the side of the mountain, a procession of singing and praying men, women, and children winds its way between two lines of kneeling pilgrims, preceding the Blessed Sacrament, escorted by scarlet-robed acolytes and priests in white and gold vestments. At twilight, the great prayerful murmur of the long torch-bearing procession makes an unforgettable impression. Inspired by the collective fervor, the pilgrim is moved by but one desire: to be but a voice blended in prayer and song, an atom lost in that throng which God is drawing unto himself. The oratory is a place in which one comes palpably in contact with the supernatural, where one breathes the very atmosphere of divine grace, and where human faith shows itself naked and unashamed. It is an oasis to which we all, poor wayworn travelers to eternity, may come for spiritual regeneration, for strength to take up anew the battles of life. Here, temporal favors are the allurements Christ makes use of, as he did in the days of his earthly life, to draw the hearts of men. Along the St. Lawrence River, one may often see fish swept in on the tide from the deep waters and caught in traps when the tide recedes. So is the shrine of St. Joseph a divine fishing net into which the incoming tide of visitors sweeps sinners, and then, when it recedes, leaves them imprisoned within the Master's love. Concerning the divine work of the oratory, Archbishop Gaudier made a clear pronouncement in his circular letter of April 14, 1937. After recalling the exhortation of the Holy Father to have recourse to St. Joseph in the great war of the Catholic Church against atheistic communism, the spiritual leader of the diocese added, "There has long been practiced in Montreal this confident recourse to St. Joseph, and it has been marked by an extraordinary intensity since the foundation of the oratory on Mount Royal. I can say of what has happened here only what all the world knows. It is palpably visible in the atmosphere of the great pilgrimage. No one comes here without leaving a better person. I can never think without deep emotion of the bounteous mercy here poured out. All the cares, all the sorrows of our great city come to beat as a wave against the promontory on which St. Joseph has his domicile. There, the great saint welcomes us, always tender and always pitiful towards our miseries. How honored and filled with confidence we should be, because St. Joseph extends his powerful arms above us. Our city to bless and protect it. Such a prodigious growth cannot be ascribed to human means. Only the special action of Providence can account for it. The first chapel, the crypt, and the basilica were built by the millions of coins offered by those who received favors at Mount Royal. The amount given by the merely curious, by the tourists, is far less than one would suppose. Donations of considerable sums are almost unknown. The Lord prefers the alms inspired by a supernatural motive, the offerings of the poor, given as a token of gratitude. That the development of this work is replete with the marvelous can be revealed by a few examples. A young professor, Father Adolphe Clement, being threatened with the loss of his sight, had to resign his professorship and was then appointed chaplain for the first oratory. One evening, when he was walking with Brother André, he expressed his desire, "If you want me to work for St. Joseph, you must get me back my sight. I can no longer read my breviary, and it is only with the greatest difficulty that I can read the Mass. Tomorrow you can begin the recitation of your breviary." The brother answered simply, "For 25 years, this priest devoted himself to his duties at the oratory, much to the astonishment of oculists, who sometimes said to him, 'We cannot understand how, with eyes like yours, you are able to read.'" The story of another associate of Brother André deserves mention here, for it reads like one of those enchanting legends to be found in some illuminated manuscript of the great ages of faith. A sexagenarian was living alone on a patch of ground which he had cleared in a lifelong struggle against the forest. His wife had just died, and his son, the only survivor of his numerous children, had gone to seek his fortune far from home. The old man, Joseph Malenfant, had nothing to do except live peacefully and independently on his little estate at St. Hubert de Temiscouata, some 300 miles east of Montreal. His peace was disturbed, however, by a strange and obsessing dream in which he saw an old man trying vainly to build a church, and heard him calling for help. At length he concluded, "This dream seems to be inspired by heaven. To remove all my doubts in the matter, I shall go in search of the old man who is asking for my assistance." When his friends and acquaintances ridiculed the import of his dream, he replied with his favorite maxim, which indicates his self-sacrificing devotedness. Not to help others is to be useless. It is better to obey God than man. He at once set out for Montreal. There, he heard of the sanctuary on the mountain. As he was climbing up the path to the oratory, he came upon the old man he had seen in his vision. Brother André himself related the incident. As I was going down the mountain, I saw a man looking at me. I crossed the road and said to him, "You are just the man I need." After this, he faced challenges in that diocese. Having no credentials to show that he was doing God's work, he met with refusals, insults, and difficulties. To these temptations to discouragement, he confided, "Often Satan whispered in my ear, 'You are an old fool, Malenfant. You had a fine farm and assured livelihood. And now look at yourself. You are a tramp, a beggar, good for nothing. You sleep in barns, you tramp the highways.' But I answered him, 'Begone, Satan, not to help others is to be useless.' After traversing the province, he came back." Here is the corrected text without page numbers. Malenfant gave Father Dion the round sum of $14. The latter accepted the gift, but asked Malenfant not to continue his vagabond life. Unaccustomed to the dignified and reserved demeanor of this priest, the old man said to one of the religious, "Your superior is not a man, he is an icicle." Soon, however, driven by his motto, "To assist no one is to be of no use," Mr. Malenfant was again wending his way on his mission. On the advice of a priest, he began to pay pupils home for the Annals of St. Joseph. Of the said, "I have decided to analyze the whole country." For 10 years, until his death in July 1924, he continued this wandering life. In the summertime, he went sometimes to New Brunswick and even to Labrador, and he was lodged at the shrine for several winters. He alone received about 35,000 subscriptions to the magazine. Passing over the numerous collaborators associated with the work accomplished on Mount Royal, let us focus on the work of the humble lay brother who still resided over the extension of the devotion to Saint Joseph. A multitude of charming incidents could be gleaned from this period of his life. He tells us, "For a long time it was my duty to clean the oratory. I was also sexton, and I often served 5 or 6 masses, one after another. One morning, when a strange priest arrived, there was not a single altar bread remaining. I ran so fast to the college to get a host that I got back without making him wait." Vigilant, active, indefatigable, he kept everything in and around the church perfectly neat and clean. One year, a few days before Christmas, he pointed out to the bursar that the pavement in the crypt needed scrubbing. The latter forgot all about it. So, one evening, Brother André, with the help of a lay brother from Notre Dame College, set about scrubbing. Had not the Father Provincial unfortunately surprised him in the act and sent him to bed, he would have spent the whole night at the work. In the meantime, the little old man who was so humble and who made himself the servant of his confreres was becoming in the public mind the living image of Saint Joseph. As the pilgrims said, "We come to pray to Brother André's Saint Joseph, we come to see Brother André." Here, as at Lourdes, a florid display of favors manifests the action of God. For the miraculous spring of Lourdes was substituted the touch or the word of the humble brother. In 1912, the Archbishop of Montreal, when showing the crowd the votive offerings left at the oratory, proclaimed, "Shall I say that miracles are wrought here? Were I to deny the facts, these ex-votos, witnesses of all species of suffering, would contradict me." Almost every favor was obtained by the mediation of Brother André, who during the day gave audience to pilgrims and spent a part of the night in prayer. We can select, here and there, a few typical cases related by witnesses themselves. These are facts that could not be invented, and they alone can suggest the atmosphere at the oratory. One day, overwhelmed by the number of the visitors and unable to receive them one by one, Brother André went into the waiting room, took his stand behind the counter containing religious souvenirs, and asked each visitor in succession what he wanted. To each one, he gave substantially the same answer. "Rub yourself with the medal and with Saint Joseph's image. Make a novena." His gaze was riveted for a moment on one cripple. Give me your crutches. Now walk." The cripple complied, and was so overjoyed at finding himself cured that he could not utter one syllable. Overcome with emotion, he turned, dashed out, ran down the hall, and got on the first streetcar that passed by. Those who saw the miracle stood gaping with astonishment. Without any interruption, Brother André continued, "And what can I do for you, sir? My arm is paralyzed, I cannot move it. Go to confession and then start a novena." "I beg your pardon. Dash dash dash. Let me know if you need any further modifications." T.I. said, "Go to confession and then start a novena, but I haven't gone to confession for the last 20 years. You have let him go. Do you think he will come back?" "Yes, I am sure of it." And he did. He came back, went to confession, and received Holy Communion. Brother André delighted in describing the exuberant joy of this convert. On another occasion, a few moments before the service usually held at the oratory at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Brother André left his office to attend the devotion. On his way, he was accosted by a friend. "Brother André, I have something important to tell you. Come after the service. Perhaps that will be too late, for my sister-in-law is dying. I have been asked to recommend her to you. She is in good health. You misunderstand me. She is at the point of death." Without making any answer, Brother André went on his way to the crypt. The following day, the petitioner received a telephone call. "Guess who is speaking? I recognize your voice, but no, that is impossible. You must be mistaken. The person I thought you were is anointed and is probably dead at this moment. No, it is really I, your sister-in-law. Yesterday afternoon, between 2:45 and 3 o'clock, I was suddenly cured. I came to the city last night and am now on my way to the oratory." Shortly afterwards, the same man accompanied Brother André's office with a woman who had a stiff arm, a result of a long illness. "Brother André, please rub her arm." "No, take your medal of St. Joseph and rub yourself." As a matter of fact, Brother André always showed himself scrupulously reserved on this point. In vain had his enemies sent to him women who insisted on being taken care of by him, so they might have a pretext to slander him. In this case, the man declared, "As I applied the medal to her stiff wrist, I kept looking at Brother André, who was praying in front of me. At the precise moment that he closed his eyes, I felt her arm become perfectly flexible." At times, merely the sight of the brother was sufficient to work a cure. For example, a man wasted with tuberculosis and doomed to swift death was taken to the oratory. Lost in the closely packed ranks of petitioners, he caught only a glimpse of the little religious, and forthwith said to his wife, who was with him, "I need not wait my turn, for I feel perfectly cured. Let's go to the church to thank God and give the offering promised in return for my restoration to health." The very next day, he returned to his work and never felt any recurrence of the disease. There were many eyewitnesses of the following signal miracle. A great contingent of American visitors had thronged around the doors of the office all morning. At dinner time, the brother returned to the rectory. He was already mounting its steps under the eyes of hundreds of pilgrims when a man went up the steps to stop him and to show him, through the open door of an ambulance that had made its way amid the tumultuous crowd, a man lying on a stretcher. "Untie him and let him walk," said the brother simply, and went on into the house without further ado. The sick man got up and walked barefoot through the madly enthusiastic crowd. Such facts, recorded by the hundreds, explain the presence of the throngs of pilgrims. Brother André, however, sought the healing of souls far more than the healing of bodies, and this healing was always his primary care. When dense crowds besieged his office, he would willingly spend over an hour working for the conversion of a sinner, though the reception of a sick man was generally the matter of a moment. He repeatedly explained that temporal favors are but means conducive to spiritual regeneration. The Lord draws man to himself by that natural instinct which leads him to pray for temporal favors. Anxious Win souls. He makes use of the word or the touch of a servant, of a relic, or of a drop of oil, as means to effect favors, just as during his earthly life, he used a little clay in order to heal the man who had been blind from birth. Brother André constantly directed towards Saint Joseph the marvelous attraction he himself exerted on crowds. With winning charm, he conjured up the figure of the Nazarene carpenter, contrasting his life of submission, obedience, and trials with the spirit of pride and sensuality that is so prevalent nowadays, even among Christians. One of his constant companions said that he used to talk about Saint Joseph and the Holy Family with the ease and simplicity of one who is talking about well-known ancestors, and that he prayed to Saint Joseph just as if he were conversing with him. His devotion to the Holy Patriarch was instrumental in directing the affection of the faithful towards Jesus' suffering. At night, when he was returning from visiting the sick, he always made the way of the cross with the companion who drove him back. Of this experience, one of his friends said he would stop to listen to the answer and then continue to talk. In full bloom, gradually a circle of his friends began to take part in religious exercises, and thus originated the public way of the cross, which has been held every Friday at the oratory for the last 30 years, and the Holy Hour, which takes place on the same evening in a similar manner. Brother André used to invite his companions to the chapel. Then, in the darkness, he would light a candle and set it on his prie-dieu, and would continue his prayer until the candle was completely consumed. These services became so well attended that he requested the Father Rector to preside over them. Such is, in brief, the work accomplished on Mount Royal by an obscure little lay brother of Holy Cross. Its marvelous flowering was effected by the power of his profound faith and his blind fidelity to divine inspiration. Indeed, he sometimes declared, "Saint Joseph told me to place the oratory in that spot." This assertion seems to imply not so much a genuine vision as an interior voice. This opinion is confirmed by a letter from Archbishop Bruchesi. Concerning Brother André, I should like to relate an interesting fact which, so far as I am aware, is not generally known. When Father Dion came with Brother André to see me about erecting the oratory on Mount Royal, I drew attention to the greatness and the expense of the undertaking and asked the good brother if he were not afraid to begin it. He answered in the negative. Then I said to him, "Brother, I have something to ask you. Is there anything of a supernatural character in what you are doing? Do you think you have visions? Did good Saint Joseph make you understand that he wants a temple on Mount Royal?" To this he answered, "There is nothing of that kind. I have only my great devotion to Saint Joseph. This is what guides me and gives me full confidence." Such frankness, such humble and beautiful simplicity struck me forcibly. Just as the pilgrim, after contemplating from a distance the oratory on the side of the mountain, approaches nearer and nearer, and then enters the somber chapel where he seeks the altar and kneels close to it to pray, so let us, now that we have looked at the exterior and work of Brother André, try to penetrate into his innermost self, coming step by step into that sanctuary until we enter with deep respect into the veiled splendor of his intimate union with God. The confidence in conformity with our plan of relating the life of Brother André in the simplest manner possible, let us come with no preconceived ideas to the study of his soul, applying the method of the photographer rather than that. Here is the corrected version of the OCR text with page numbers removed. Of the painter, so as to sketch reality, that is, the characteristic features of his personal sanctity. Let us not try to describe his virtues by a set order of their dignity. Rather, let us note them as they flower forth in his daily living among us. Let us describe in the order in which they come to our habitual notice 3 dominant traits of his character: an unchangeable faith, an unfailing humility, a heroic charity. When Brother Andre's friends and fellow religious were asked for their impression of His Holiness, they followed this same order in their reply. One of them declared, "He was a man of extraordinary faith." He then cited a few instances to prove the point, and concluded, "In spite of that, he showed not the slightest trace of pride." We shall elaborate somewhat on the self-sacrifice and the devotions of this servant of God, and we shall complete our sketch taken from real life by pointing out a few points of resemblance, physical and moral, between Brother André and the Curé of Ars. There was no end to the confidence of Saint Joseph's apostle, with the result that his whole existence was woven with divine marvels. Never did he yield to the least discouragement during the delays before the realization of the extraordinary work entrusted to him by divine providence. During his whole life, his prayers were offered, not to beg favors, but to thank God in advance for the liberality on which he set his hope. Endeavoring to retain the savor that characterizes the narrative of the eyewitness, we shall now recall certain incidents which demonstrate the unwavering faith of Brother André. On one occasion, an unfortunate victim of an accident was carried to the oratory. His gangrenous legs were like meat boiled to shreds, and the doctor had declared they must be amputated immediately, telling the patient, who still cherished the hope of being cured without this cruel remedy, "It is as impossible to save you without this surgery as it would be to cause the St. Lawrence River to flow upstream." A witness who saw Brother André, despite this verdict, delicately rub the mutilated flesh of the poor man, said, "Surely Saint Joseph is not going to make new legs grow." There is nothing left. Undisturbed, the humble brother continued to attend to his patient until he was made well. Once Brother André was called to the bedside of a dying mother, only to be told on his arrival, "You are too late." The doctor, judging that she could live only a few moments, had already given the death certificate. Her family, believing her dead, had covered her face with a veil. Brother André knelt by the bed, unveiled the face of the supposed dead woman, and touched her lightly. She opened her eyes. Then, becoming fully reanimated, she murmured, "I am hungry." The good old man gave her a piece of orange to eat. One can only recall the scene in the Gospel in which our dear Lord said to Jairus after raising his daughter to life, "Give her something to eat." Another mother brought to Brother André her young son, whose weakened spine could not hold his body erect. In this case, the brother simply declared him cured. The overjoyed mother at once took off the plaster cast and iron rod that held her son's body and head in position. The superior vainly tried to dissuade her from such imprudence, but the little boy, on being freed from his harness, began immediately to romp about. A certain man was so afflicted with rheumatism that he could not suffer even the lightest touch without loud groans of anguish. Brother André vigorously rubbed the afflicted limbs, then asked, "Do you feel better?" Again rubbing them, he said, "Stand up now, you are cured." A woman with cancer went to the oratory, and Brother André declared her cured. Her doctor, who had decided to operate on her, refused to believe in the miracle and began the operation only to find no trace of the cancer. The following occurrence was related by Brother André to show the goodness of Saint Joseph and to remind us that those miraculously cured do not need the help of the surgeon's knife. An operation had been pronounced necessary for a woman with a very large tumor in her back. Before undergoing it, she came to the oratory where all trace of her trouble disappeared. On the day appointed for the operation, she came to the hospital and asked to be examined once more. The doctor, to his great amazement, could discover no trace of the growth and finally asked in a bewildered way, on which side was the tumor? When a certain patient recommended himself to the prayers of Brother André before undergoing an operation, he was told, "Do not have an operation, pray to Saint Joseph instead." The friends who often accompanied the revered brother on his visits to the sick testify that no one had to regret following such advice. Such absolute confidence in divine providence, far from being temerity, indicates rather a constant submission to the inspirations of God. How dare you make such decisions without hesitation? Asked a priest. If I were you, I should be afraid of tempting the Lord. It is easy to see that Saint Joseph is going to heal them, replied the brother. Why do you content yourself with urging some persons to pray, while to others you say bluntly, give up your crutches, if you cannot walk it is because you are lazy? Why this difference? The old man paused for a moment, and then said, oftentimes, you see, it is obvious that they are cured. From these answers, we see that Saint Joseph was his inspiration and guide during the long hours he devoted to the alleviation of human miseries. Brother Andre demanded the same confidence from those who sought his aid. When someone complained because his prayer was only half heard, he said, if you do not wish to lose what you have obtained, continue to pray. To an importunate person who cried, cure me, he replied, you will not be cured because you lack confidence in God. You come to demand that I cure you, as if I were a doctor. If God owes you anything, go ask it. Here is another narrative from an intimate friend of Brother Andre. I was talking with the brother when a crippled young man came in. He declared, I have waited long enough. My novena ends tomorrow, and if I am not cured, I will have my leg amputated. Brother Andre replied, as you like. Do you want me to call up the surgeon right now? The young man went out, exasperated. I hurried to follow him. That is a fine way to receive people, he said to me. I will never return here. You are only punishing yourself, I answered. How long has your doctor been attending you? 5 years. Did he do you any good? Yet you are not angry because you have paid him for his services. And now, when Brother Andre, who receives you out of pure kindness, does not heal you, you are furious. Listen to me, my friend. Go back to see him, and do whatever he tells you. The young man complied, and Brother Andre was so certain his confidence and submission would be rewarded that he simply said to him, begin another novena in honor of Saint Joseph. If, on the 9th day, you are not cured, I myself will amputate your leg. A woman completely paralyzed in both legs was carried to the oratory. An assistant to Brother Andre, who received the pilgrims and kept them in line, kindly asked them to let the woman be taken to the brother immediately, adding that there might be a miracle. The paralytic, accompanied by 4 people, came into the office. Suddenly, through the thin partition, came the raised voice of the brother. All listened attentively. Get up and walk. Oh no, I cannot. My legs are completely paralyzed. Woman of little faith, I command you, get up and walk. Suddenly, in the doorway, the miraculously cured woman appeared, tears streaming from her eyes, dumb with overwhelming emotion. Amid the wild enthusiasm of the witnesses, she walked, strong and erect. At times, Brother Andre demanded of his clients a blind, heroic faith. A farmer who had been injured by a mowing machine went to the shrine. He was told, take your crutches into the church. Tomorrow you shall resume your work. The man obeyed, limping painfully. Don't you see that you are not cured? Said his companions. The injured man, not at all dismayed, followed the order given and went back to work the next day. With great effort, he managed to plow, or rather, to crawl along behind his plow. When evening came, in spite of cruel remarks and the pain of his swollen feet, he still remained hopeful. The next morning he awoke perfectly cured. Another man came to Brother Andre's office to tell him, my sister is afflicted with cancer in her chest, which has caused caries in 3 of her ribs. An emergency operation is, according to the doctor, the only means of saving her. Tell her not to be operated on, that Saint Joseph will heal her. Every day at noon, the petitioner came back to say, my sister is getting worse. She is going to die. And he was reassured, if she has no other disease, she will not die. In return for her heroic confidence, the patient